There is no game bigger in the country than the one happening in Tuscaloosa, 6:30 p.m. on ABC. The number 2 Georgia Bulldogs, 3.5-point favorites. Actually, time of recording, I believe it's down to 2.5. At number 4, Alabama. Guys, this is a fantastic matchup. Storylines abound. Kalen DeBoer taking over for Nick Saban. Obviously, that is going to be the storyline, I think, that leads College Game Day. Kirby Smart coming into Tuscaloosa. They have one of the toughest schedules in the country. Both teams are off a bye. Garrett, let's start with you. Talk to me about this game. What stands out to you as the X factor as one of these two teams really looks to maybe put the most impressive win in the country in their resume?
Well, Mitch, I love the fact that you said X Factor because that is basically my point about this game. I'm taking Bama to win this game outright, and I'll tell you why. I think the situation with this game is, look, both teams are good. Both are extremely talented. Both teams have stacked rosters. Both teams are well coached, right? I know that Kalen DeBoer is new, but he's still a great coach. Took his team to the playoff last year at Washington. He's a great coach, and what he's done in the short term at Bama has really kept the ship afloat. I know that a lot of people thought maybe they'd really take a drop off. It doesn't seem as though that's happened. This is still a very good Alabama team who's playing, I think, very good football. Hasn't been perfect, right? Nobody's played a perfect game so far. Neither of these teams have been perfect the entire way, by the way. Georgia's certainly not perfect against Kentucky either. But when you have two teams that have championship pedigree like this, who could both realistically push for a championship this year, you have to find X factors, right? What you said up the top. You have to find somebody who's going to make that extra play, who's going to say, when the chips are down and my team has got its back against the wall, I'm going to make that play that really shouldn't happen. I'm just finding the way to make that work for my team. When I look at the Georgia Bulldogs, I don't really see that player. I'm sure that they have that guy on the roster somewhere, and there's plenty, again, talented players all over that roster. But Carson Beck doesn't scare me as a X factor. Right. I don't see a receiver right now in their core that I would say that guy's going to make that explosive play. I think that when you look at this game, Alabama has the X factors, right? Jalen Milroe is extremely talented. I think he's the best player on the field in this game. And when you combine him with guys like Ryan Williams, who's provided such a spark in that receiver core, and thinking about some of the guys that they have on that team, I think those two guys by themselves will probably combine for one or two just big plays that help take this thing over the top when really, maybe Georgia is the better team. Maybe Bama isn't quite playing their best game. But I do think that Milroe and Williams will be able to connect on at least one or two big-time plays to put this one out of reach for the Bulldogs. So I do think Milroe at home crowd, getting to play in front of his fans, getting to roll with that. I'm rolling with the Tide on this one. I think that this is Alabama playing well at home. I understand it's not Nick Saban anymore, but this would be a heck of a notch for Kalen DeBoer in his first year as the Alabama coach.
It's fun that we get a new chapter in a series that has been so close over the last couple of years. And now, obviously, Alabama breaking in a new head man. But the team, Garrett, as you mentioned, has really stepped up. They've looked good this year. At times, they've had some growing pains. But Trey, with that, Georgia's got a little bit of a bad taste in their mouths from what the Tide did to them last year.
Yeah, I think this is a classic revenge game spot for Georgia. I'm going to take them minus the points. I had them at minus 3.5. It's all the way down to 2 at what I'm looking at right now. So yeah, give me the -2, 100%. And guys, I'm just really, how many times does Georgia have to do this where they really struggle in a game that they shouldn't, and then they come out after a little bit of time off? I know they both had the bye week, but Georgia has the bye week. They come out and just look like the Georgia Bulldogs again. They've done that time and time again over the last few years. And defensively, y'all know that there's 16 quarters in a row without surrendering a touchdown, right? Like that's a stat that has merit there. Defense is going to travel to Tuscaloosa. I'm not worried. This is the same Georgia team that also destroyed Clemson. That win is aging really, really well by the week. So I'm rolling with the Bulldogs until proven otherwise, guys. When they were on a neutral field last year, the difference in this game was one fumble. It was a fumble in Georgia territory, led to a field goal. That was the difference in the game. It was a 27-24 final. I think Georgia has the talent and has the horses to win this game. I do think they have a bad taste in their mouth from last year. This is also Kalen DeBoer's first taste of big SEC football. He's looked great so far. He's passed all the tests on paper and in the press conferences and against the non-conference slate, but this is his first test against SEC football, and he doesn't really get to dip his toe in with like a Kentucky or Vanderbilt or South Carolina or any of these other teams. He's got the Georgia Bulldogs right off the bat. So I know a lot has been made about Kirby Smart's record against Alabama this week. He's 1-5. Obviously, that's all against Saban. I do think this is a opportunity for Georgia where they're going to come out and remind everyone that they should be the top dogs in the nation. No pun intended. But the top team in the land, they're going to restake their claim to that number one spot in the polls. And I think they're really motivated to do so.
Does the winner of this game jump to number one? Texas is taking on Mississippi State. To be honest, Ohio State plays Michigan State. So not impressive wins either way for the Longhorns or the Buckeyes on the slate. But does the winner of this game not only have the best win in the country, but jump to number one in your mind on Sunday morning?
Georgia would. I think Alabama would probably jump to 2 because you just don't see 4-1 very often, even this early in the season.
It probably depends on how as well. Like if it's a low-scoring game that's not super impressive, I could see them saying, oh, well, neither offense really looked so good, and we've seen Texas offense look amazing. And so I could see them not putting either of these teams at 1 if it's a low-scoring thing. But if either of these team wins like a blowout-style game, which, again, I don't think is going to happen, but if either of these teams win this game by like 20 points, I think that's where you have to say that team's going to be number one. So probably depends on how. It would be a little bit more shocking to watch Bama jump all the way up, but I think there's a real case to be made that either of these teams could jump if they win this game.
Trey, you talked about the defense. I want to look at the offense here. Couple of stats that stuck out to me. Number one is Georgia's lack of ability to run the ball this season. Now, they haven't necessarily had a healthy backfield, right? Trevor Etienne has missed some. He was suspended. They've had some bumps and bruises in the backfield as well. But Georgia has not been able to push opposing teams over in the trenches on that offensive line and open up holes for the running game. For me, a road team that isn't able to run the ball better have like a Texas-like offensive aerial attack. And I don't know that we've seen that from the Georgia Bulldogs this season so far. Now, could it potentially show up in Tuscaloosa? Possibly. Alabama has a very young secondary. They've played well so far, but it is a young, generally unproven secondary unit taking on one of the elite of the elites. On the other side, I haven't really seen much consistency from Carson Beck throwing the ball down the field. Garrett, you talked about wanting to see if there's a guy like a Dominic Lovett who can step up and just seize the game, bull by the horns, take over the offense. We're waiting on that still, I think, for the Georgia Bulldogs. They don't have a Brock Bowers or a Ladd McConkey who's the safety blanket for Carson Beck. So Carson might have to create a little bit of his own magic, and he's been able to do it at times. But there's no doubt that it's a mixed bag, mixed review on Carson Beck. You can look at Twitter and you can see guys saying he's going first overall in the draft. You can look at guys saying this guy doesn't belong anywhere near a pro football field. I mean, the gambit is rather impressive. Alabama's offense, super balanced so far this season. They're actually first in Eccles point rating, which is essentially a metric of judging how well you finish drives, how many points per drive that you put up. Alabama is first in that metric. So they've been extremely consistent through the air, on the ground, finishing drives, making sure that they're getting points every time they go down the field. They're facing the top passing defense in the country from the Georgia Bulldogs. They held that explosive Clemson offense to next to nothing and made a bunch of us look like a fool by criticizing Garrett Riley and Cade Klubnik. Now, was it a case of maybe not their best day, not their worst day? Absolutely. I think Clemson has improved quite a bit, learned a lot of lessons from that Georgia loss, just like Oregon did a couple of years ago. Finally, I look at who can bring that explosive X factor. And guys, it is Ryan Williams for the Crimson Tide. True freshman wide receivers, 10 catches, 285 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He's going to stretch this Georgia defense vertically. And with the ability that Jalen Milroe has to extend games with his legs, or extend plays with his legs, I like the Tide getting points at home. I'm going to pick Alabama outright, but as soon as that line came out at 3.5, something tugged on the old heartstrings, and I'm going to go ahead and take the candy with the Crimson Tide. I know it's a big spot for DeBoer, but something in me wants to believe that there's a little bit of Tuscaloosa magic on a Saturday night.
Yeah, I totally get all those points. I totally get it. I just think that Georgia has a little something extra that we haven't quite seen yet. We saw glimpses of it in that second half against Clemson. We can see glimpses of it. They seem like a team that turns it on and off at a will over the last few years. They're going to be ready for this one, guys. And I think that it's gonna come down to if they can limit the explosive plays for Alabama. If they can contain Jalen Milroe, they did a great job of that last year. He had a couple of runs that he kind of busted out of the pocket a little bit, but 4 sacks against the Alabama offensive line. An offensive line that was a big problem last year and hasn't really been tested. Certainly not to the level that Georgia is going to test it Saturday night. So contain Jalen Milroe, get to him, rush the quarterback like he did last year in Atlanta. I think they're walking out of Tuscaloosa with a victory.
Gracious him. How about